David awoke as he did every morning, precisely when the alarm rang at 6 a.m. The sound was not irritating, but rather a gentle reminder that a new day had begun. Everything would unfold as anticipated, a comforting predictability. With an almost automatic motion, he reached out to silence the alarm, feeling the residual warmth of Emma beside him in bed. She was still asleep, her breathing soft and even. He quietly exited the bedroom, traversed the familiar hallway, and entered the kitchen, where he instinctively knew his routine. He filled the coffee maker with the exact amount of water, measured and precise, as he had done countless times before. Opening the coffee container, he inhaled the robust aroma of the freshly ground beans, a scent that had become synonymous with his morning ritual. He placed the grounds in the filter, allowing the rich, dark brew to begin its process. As the machine worked, he leaned against the counter, gazing out the window. The sky remained dark, a canvas of deep blues and blacks, but the outlines of trees in the yard were visible against the horizon, their silhouettes standing tall and unyielding. Everything seemed in order. Once the coffee was ready, he picked up his favorite mug, a gift from his children, adorned with shaky, barely decipherable drawing that he cherished more than any fine china. It was a tangible reminder of their love, their innocence, and the joyful chaos of parenthood. David settled at the kitchen table, opened his laptop, and began sifting through emails. The messages were always the same: meetings, reports, proposals. Nothing surprising or unexpected. Each one felt like a brick in the wall of routine that surrounded him. A few minutes later, Emma entered the kitchen, wearing a blue silk robe that hung loosely around her frame, her hair pinned back haphazardly, as if she hadn't bothered to style it. The sight stirred something inside David. She looked beautiful still, but there was a distance in her demeanor. She poured herself coffee without a word, sat across from him, and stared out the window, seemingly lost in thought, as if she were gazing into another world. "Did you sleep well?" David asked, still focused on his screen, hoping to draw her back into the present. She replied, her tone devoid of the warmth that usually colored their morning exchanges. He glanced up and observed her for a moment. Emma's features appeared more subdued than before. While he would always find her beautiful, something felt different. Something was missing. Her eyes lacked the sparkle they once had, and her smile, once spontaneous and bright, now seemed forced. When was the last time she genuinely laughed? He couldn't recall, and that realization gnawed at him. Attempting to engage her in conversation about work, he found her responses brief, almost monosyllabic. The silence that followed felt heavy and unsettling, unlike the comfortable silences of their past, those born from intimacy and understanding, where words weren't always necessary. Now, an invisible wall seemed to stand between them, and David was unsure how or when it had come to be. Trying to ignore the discomfort, he finished his coffee, stood up to grab his briefcase and car keys, and, as he passed Emma, leaned down to kiss her forehead. To his surprise, she flinched slightly, as if the gesture had caught her off guard, or worse, been unwelcome. He paused for a moment, questioning if he had imagined it. Choosing to remain silent, he said, "I'll see you tonight," in a casual tone, hoping to mask the unease swelling within him. "See you?" she replied, her voice distant, almost as if she were addressing a stranger rather than her husband. On his drive to work, David endeavored to push his troubling thoughts aside, but the uneasy feeling lingered throughout the day. Something was amiss, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, as if he were trying to grasp smoke with his bare hands. That evening, upon returning home, David found Emma sitting in the living room armchair, her legs crossed, slowly twisting her wedding ring around her finger, a nervous habit he had come to recognize. The television was on, but she appeared oblivious to it, her mind seemingly elsewhere. The cold glow illuminated her face, highlighting her vacant expression and deepening the lines of worry etched on her brow. David hung his jacket over the back of a chair and approached her, feeling an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. "Hey," he said, attempting to sound cheerful, but the effort fell hollow. Emma turned her gaze from the screen to meet his, her eyes darker than usual, burdened by an unseen weight that made David's heart sink. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice steady yet final, making David feel as though the ground had shifted beneath him. He settled onto the couch opposite her, a knot forming in his throat. "Sure, what is it?" he replied, trying to keep his tone light, though a sense of dread washed over him. Taking a deep breath, as if steeling herself for a long-held truth, Emma began, "I don't know if I want to keep living this way." The room fell silent, a weighty hush that could not be ignored, as if time had momentarily frozen. David blinked, struggling to process her words, which lingered heavily in the air like an irrevocable verdict. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice faltering. Emma looked away, avoiding his gaze as if the truth were too daunting to confront directly. "I feel trapped, like I've been living on autopilot for years," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. David opened his mouth to respond, but found himself at a loss for words. He had always believed their lives were fine. Their routine, the brief exchanges and moments of silence were merely part of a long marriage's normalcy. He never suspected Emma felt stifled by their life together. "I love you, David," she continued, fiddling with her fingers. "But sometimes it feels like we become strangers sharing the same space, stuck in a life that isn't truly ours anymore." His heart raced. He too sensed a distance that had grown between them, but he had never imagined it would reach this point. He wished to assure her that they could fix things, that they would find a way to reconnect. But something in Emma's tone hinted that this was more than just a cry for attention. It was a warning. Rubbing his face in frustration, he sought clarity. "Are you talking about a divorce?" Emma's gaze pierced through him, and for a fleeting moment, he saw a flicker of pain in her eyes. "I'm not sure. I just know I can't continue like this." A chill gripped David's stomach. While it wasn't an outright declaration of separation, it was the first visible crack in what he had long believed to be a solid marriage. He longed to argue, to promise that everything would be all right. But Emma no longer appeared to be the woman who had once vowed to stand by his side forever. For the first time, he understood that forever was never guaranteed. In the days that followed, the house felt like a minefield. Every conversation dripped with tension, and every silence felt heavier than before. David tried to maintain normalcy, inquiring about her day or work, hoping to bridge the widening gap, but Emma seemed increasingly distant. She would respond but never elaborate, and when she did speak, her words felt like they originated from a place he could no longer reach. Then, a subtle yet unmistakable change emerged. Emma began returning home later. Initially, it was small delays due to traffic or meetings, but soon became a pattern. Sometimes, she would walk in without explanation, drop her purse on the kitchen chair, and ascend the stairs without much conversation. David tried to avoid jumping conclusions, convincing himself she merely needed space to sort her thoughts, but an unsettling feeling gnawed at him. It was during this time that Ethan's name surfaced for the first time at dinner. Emma casually mentioned him as a new co-worker, someone who brought fresh ideas to the team and kept the atmosphere lively. David noticed a slight brightness in her eyes when she spoke of him, a light that had been dim for far too long. After that, Ethan's name appeared more frequently in their conversations, accompanied by little comments here and there. Ethan suggested a new approach to the project, or Ethan showed me this incredible restaurant that opened near the office. David listened intently, absorbing every detail but remained silent. He wanted to believe that nothing was wrong, that Ethan was just another co-worker, just another name. Yet, the way Emma spoke about him, the slight change in her demeanor, troubled him. One evening, after yet another day when Emma returned late and offered him a mere peck on the cheek before retreating upstairs, David found himself alone in the living room, staring at a glass of whiskey. He attempted to rationalize his thoughts. He had never been insecure or jealous, but their marriage was already fragile, and now there was another man igniting feelings in Emma that he had long ceased to evoke. Meanwhile, Emma wrestled with her own thoughts. She hadn't sought out these emotions, but she couldn't deny that Ethan made her feel alive. Conversations flowed effortlessly. Laughter came easily, and he noticed the little things about her that David no longer saw. When she cut her hair, Ethan was the first to compliment her, even before anyone else had noticed. After a tough meeting, he texted her, expressing admiration for her intelligence. Emma recognized that she was crossing an invisible line. While she hadn't acted on it, merely conversing with Ethan felt electric. One day, he casually invited her to dinner. She hesitated, uncertain if it was a wise choice. "It's just dinner, nothing major," he assured her. Yet, deep down, she knew it was more complicated than that. That night, as she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, she confronted a troubling question. If Ethan had asked her dinner 6 months ago, when her marriage still felt stable, would she have hesitated, or would she have answered with a firm no? The uncertainty of her answer frightened her, making her acutely aware of how close she was to the edge. Sitting on the bed, she stared at her phone, which lit up with a message from Ethan. "I'm here. Got our table." Taking a deep breath, she faced a pivotal moment. All she had to do was reply, "I'm on my way," and everything continued as planned. Instead, she sat frozen, her heart racing. Slowly, she walked to her dresser, picking up a bottle of perfume she had not used in ages. Would spraying it make this all feel different? Would it render the situation too real? From downstairs, she could hear the television. David was in the living room, as always, his routine predictable and stable. But now, a different kind of silence enveloped the house. As she reached for the door, David's voice halted her. "Going out?" Turning slowly, she saw him still on the couch, eyes fixed on the screen, yet his posture was tense, as if he already anticipated her response. He didn't ask where she was going or with whom. He merely nodded. Emma paused, having expected some reaction, any question, but he remained still. Without a backward glance, she stepped outside and shut the door. Sitting in the car, she started the engine, staring blankly at the dashboard, her throat tightening. She reread Ethan's message, grappling with her thoughts. What was she doing? Her fingertips drummed nervously against the steering wheel. She tried to convince herself it was merely dinner, but an inner voice screamed that it was far more significant. In that moment of turmoil, she opened the glove compartment and discovered something folded among the papers, an old map to the beach house. Her heart sank. That was where David had proposed, where countless weekends had been spent escaping their routine, where they once talked until dawn. Suddenly, she knew where she needed to go. Grabbing her phone, she quickly typed, "Sorry, I can't," without waiting for a reply, then backed out of the driveway. Instead of heading home, she hit the road, stopping at a store to purchase her favorite wine before making her way to the beach house. Unbeknownst to Emma, David had embarked on the same journey hours earlier. He remained seated on the couch, remote in hand, not truly watching the television. When he heard Emma leave and the door shut, an odd emptiness enveloped him. For years, their routine had been filled with silent dinners, quick goodnight kisses, and predictable conversations. However, now something within him stirred, something he had long ignored. He wanted to call out to her, to ask where she was heading, but an invisible force held him back. Perhaps fear, perhaps pride, or perhaps he already knew the answer deep down. Rising from the couch, he headed to the kitchen, where he discovered an old pack of cigarettes he hadn't touched in years, staring at it momentarily before tossing it back into the drawer with a sigh. His phone lay on the table, and he contemplated calling Emma, but ultimately refrained. Opening another drawer, he stumbled upon a photograph of them at the beach house, a flood of memories washing over him. He stood there, heart heavy, recalling all the laughter and joy they had shared before their lives fell into a mundane routine. Without a second thought, he grabbed his car keys and left. No messages, no calls, just a drive. David drove slowly, the engines hummed soothing him as he felt the wind rush through the open windows. He couldn't articulate why he needed to go there, but he felt an undeniable pull. When Emma arrived at the beach house after her shopping trip, darkness enveloped the surroundings. She parked and sat in the car for a moment, listening to the sound of the waves before stepping out onto the porch. The door stood slightly ajar, and her heart raced as she turned the knob and entered. The darkness felt oppressive, yet she refrained from switching on the lights, instead heading to the living room with a familiar scent of old wood, and the sea surrounded her. And then she saw him. David sat on the couch, glass in hand, his expression one of surprise. "What are you doing here?" Emma asked, frowning, her heart pounding in her chest. "I didn't know where else to go, so I came here," David replied, exhaling as he set his glass on the coffee table, the sound echoing in the stillness. Emma felt a lump form in her throat. "So did I?" David regarded her for a moment before pulling a chair closer. "Sit with me?" After a brief pause, she walked over and sat beside him. They remained silent, listening to the waves, and this time, the silence felt different. It was a beginning, a tentative step towards something new. The sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the space between them, while the night breeze mingled the scent of salt with the aroma of aged wood that had always permeated the house. Emma and David sat side by side on the porch, enveloped in silence, merely appreciating each other's presence. It felt strange to be there once more after such a long time. Emma crossed her arms and gazed at the dark horizon, struggling to find the right words as her heart raced with a mix of anxiety and nostalgia. David turned the glass in his hands, watching the amber liquid swirl within. After a prolonged silence, he finally broke it with a poignant question. "What happened to us?" Emma felt a pang in her chest. She understood that there wasn't a singular answer, nor was there a specific moment when everything unraveled. It had occurred gradually, like a thread unspooling almost unnoticed, until nothing remained to hold on to. "I don't know," she admitted, running a hand through her hair. "I think we stopped trying." David nodded, pressing his lips together as they lapsed into silence once more. After a few moments, he spoke again. "You were going to see him tonight, weren't you?" A chill ran down Emma's spine. There was no anger in his voice, no accusation, only a statement she could not deny. She could lie, claim she was merely stepping out for a while, but the truth loomed like a shadow that could not be ignored. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. David didn't avert his gaze. "Why?" Emma closed her eyes, struggling to articulate her feelings. "Because I wanted to feel something different, something that reminded me of who I was before all this." He remained silent for a long moment, absorbing her confession. "And did you?" She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her answer. "I felt like I was about to make a mistake." David turned his gaze toward the ocean, a bitter, resigned smile forming on his lips. "So why did you come here?" "Because in the end, you were the one I wanted to find," Emma replied, her voice trembling, her heart pounding furiously against her chest. David closed his eyes, needing a moment to process her words. The silence between them transformed. It was no longer the uncomfortable silence they had endured for months. Instead, it was filled with unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings, a space ripe with possibility. "Why didn't you go somewhere else?" Emma asked softly, her heart racing as she sought some clarity in the murky waters of their relationship. "Because deep down, I was hoping you'd do the same," he admitted, causing her throat to tighten with emotion. They remained in that fragile moment, two souls who, by some twist of fate, found themselves back where it all began, standing on the precipice of decision. "I don't know how to fix this, Emma. I don't even know if it can be fixed," David confessed, his voice heavy with uncertainty and fear. "Me neither," she replied, her heart clenching painfully. As David turned to face her, Emma glimpsed something in his eyes she hadn't seen in years. A silent question, a plea, a flicker of hope that rekindled the embers of their connection. She didn't have all the answers, nor could she guarantee they could mend what had broken. But in that moment, by the sea that had witnessed their happiest days, she realized there was still something between them. Perhaps that was enough to begin anew. David extended his hand toward her, not in a routine gesture, but as a genuine invitation to bridge the chasm that had formed between them. Emma hesitated momentarily, but the warmth of his hand beckoned her. Her heart raced as she took it. They held hands, not as a perfect couple or two individuals who had resolved all their issues, but as two people who had decided to take the first step toward rediscovering each other, embracing the possibility of what could be.